He wandered into the garden just as the morning sun settled on the roses, and what happened next was something I had quietly hoped for over the years. It began with simple small talk, but quickly grew into a conversation that shifted the way we understood each other. The day started with a soft, gentle light. The air carried that delicate coolness that comes just before summer fully takes hold. I was tending to the tomato plants, brushing away a few dry leaves, when I heard slow, hesitant footsteps along the stone path behind me. I turned and saw my son Daniel. He was taller now, in his 30s, usually consumed by work or lost in his own thoughts. Quiet moments like this were rare between us, so simply seeing him there brought a warmth I hadn't felt in years. He offered me a small smile, the kind he used to give when he was a boy, soft, genuine, and slightly hesitant. "You can join me," I said, and he stepped closer, hands in his pockets, taking in the garden as if seeing it for the first time. For a few minutes, we worked side by side without speaking. He picked up the small rake and began clearing soil around the peppers, careful and deliberate, while the sun climbed higher. The only sounds were birdsong and the scrape of tools against the earth. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. He said he had been reflecting a lot lately. I didn't push him. I knew silence could be an invitation when given gently. He told me work had been overwhelming, more than he had ever admitted. The pressure he felt wasn't from me. It was self-imposed, a constant weighing of expectations. He looked tired, not in body, but in the deep, heavy way that life sometimes exhausts a person from the inside out. I listened, really listened, and I noticed something about the garden softened him. The soil, the sunlight, the familiar plants seemed to ease the tension in his words. He admitted that he had come out that morning just to be somewhere quiet, a place that made sense. He missed this garden, missed the simplicity of understanding without having to explain every detail. Hearing him say that, standing there with dirt on his palms, I felt a warmth that words could hardly capture. I told him the garden was always open to him, that I was always open to him. For the first time in a long while, he looked at me with the same ease he had when he was a child, before adult life had pushed him into corners I could not see. We didn't solve everything that morning, but we began to rebuild something quietly, side by side in the sunlight. The following morning arrived bright and gentle. I brewed my coffee and wandered out to the garden, careful not to expect Daniel again. Yesterday had already felt miraculous, and I didn't want to pressure the fragile shift that had begun. Halfway through my second cup, I heard the gate click. He was there, shoulders slightly less tense, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. Without a word, he handed me one, and we stood sipping quietly. The steam curled between us in the cool morning air, a gentle reminder that some things don't need to be rushed. He asked if I needed help, and I almost laughed at how naturally it came. I pointed toward the back row, where the herbs had grown wild and tangled. He crouched beside me, moving slowly, thoughtfully, as if he didn't want to disturb more than necessary. We started with small talk. What to plant next season, the weather, how the neighborhood had changed, but even this felt meaningful. Each word seemed to quietly rebuild the bridge we had been longing to cross for years. After a while, Daniel paused and leaned back on his hands, gazing at the sky. He said he had been thinking about yesterday, about allowing himself to slow down enough to speak what had been weighing him down. He admitted he didn't usually open up, not with friends, not at work, and certainly not with me. I reassured him, softly, that being open didn't make a person weak. It made them human. He nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. Then he shared something unexpected. He had felt disconnected from himself and others, trapped in a life that often felt like a windowless room where the air never changed. I reached out and lightly touched his sleeve, letting him know I was listening. He didn't pull away. Instead, he looked at the rows of vegetables and wildflowers and said he could breathe here, that being in the garden, working with his hands, steadied him in a way he hadn't felt in years. We continued tending the herbs, but our movements were slower now, more connected. The sun warmed my back, and the scent of rosemary drifted as he brushed aside the leaves. Something quiet, yet strong, was beginning to mend between us, not through grand gestures, but through honest, shared moments. Before leaving, he asked if I'd be in the garden again tomorrow. I assured him I usually was. He smiled, not widely but meaningfully, and said he might come again if I didn't mind. I told him I never would. The next morning brought overcast skies, soft and calm, wrapping the yard in a blanket of gray light. I stepped outside, trying not to hope too much. But before I could put on my gloves, I heard the gate open. Daniel entered with a calmness I hadn't seen in years, carrying a small wooden box he had found in the garage, the kind he once used to store little tools as a child. We set to work on a corner of the garden where the soil needed turning. He dug steadily, methodically. I planted new seedlings beside him, fragile but full of potential. After a while, he spoke, reflecting on his youth, how quiet moments in the garden had shaped him, giving him a sense of safety he hadn't fully understood. I told him those moments had meant as much to me. Life moves quickly, and parents often forget to say what they feel. He paused, resting on the handle of a shovel, and admitted he had felt lost in recent years, drifting from responsibility to responsibility. He wondered who he was trying so hard to become. I reminded him that it was never too late to rediscover oneself, to breathe differently, and to choose a new path. The garden had seen many seasons, each bringing change without erasing the past. He took a deep breath and expressed gratitude for my patience, my non-judgment, for still making space for him. We worked in silence, but it was not empty. It was full, steady, like the earth beneath our feet. Eventually, we sat on the stone bench by the lilacs. The garden stretched around us, alive with plants, flowers, and the subtle hum of bees. Daniel said he felt lighter, not fixed, not fully certain of anything, but lighter. Sometimes I realized that's all a person needs to move forward. He told me he wanted to help in the garden regularly, to hold on to something steady. The sun that day felt warmer, softer, as if the garden had been waiting for this moment. We worked together in quiet rhythm, the air filled with the scent of earth and new growth. The hum of the world seemed to pause around us, sacred in its own way. The garden was no longer just a place of plants. It had become a space for trust, understanding, and the slow rebuilding of connection. The next morning dawned with a quiet promise. I woke earlier than usual, the sun still low and hesitant in the sky. The garden smelled of wet earth from the overnight dew, the scent of lavender and rosemary mingling in the cool air. I hadn't expected Daniel to come again, yet part of me quietly hoped. There's something in the heart that senses when change is taking root, even before it blooms fully. Before I could pick up my gloves, the familiar click of the gate announced his presence. Daniel stepped into the yard, carrying the small wooden box he had brought the day before. His expression was calm, a softness in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. The tension that usually hovered around him seemed lighter, somehow diffused by the very act of being here, in this place that had always been ours. We moved to the back corner of the garden where the soil was uneven and weeds had started to reclaim the space. Daniel knelt beside me, hands brushing aside dirt and fallen leaves. I followed, planting seedlings, small but vibrant, each one a promise of growth. His movements were careful, deliberate, and there was a rhythm to our shared work that felt almost meditative. The garden had always been a place where time slowed, but now it felt sacred, a place where wounds could quietly mend. After a while, Daniel spoke, not looking up from the soil. "I've been thinking about how much I used to avoid slowing down," he said. "I thought being busy meant I was succeeding, but now I see I was just running from myself." His voice was steady, reflective, carrying a weight that had been lifted slightly by the act of speaking aloud. I listened, nodding. It's easy to get lost in life's demands. Sometimes we forget that being present is as important as achieving. And it's never too late to reclaim that presence. He looked up then, meeting my gaze. For a long moment, the sunlight caught his face, highlighting the subtle lines of adulthood that hadn't been there when he was a boy helping me in this very garden. "I've spent years trying to be what I thought everyone wanted me to be," he said softly. "I've ignored parts of myself that mattered most. And it's exhausting." "I understand," I said. But being tired in that way doesn't mean failure. It means you're human. And recognizing it is the first step towards something better. He smiled faintly, a small, vulnerable curve of the lips. You make it sound so simple. It's never simple, I replied, brushing dirt from my hands. But it is possible if you let it be. We worked in companionable silence for a while, the garden alive around us. Birds moved from branch to branch, the occasional butterfly flitted over the flowers, and the soil felt warm under our fingers. Daniel began sharing small stories from his childhood, the way he remembered hiding little treasures in the soil, how he used to watch me tend the roses, how those quiet mornings made him feel safe without him ever fully realizing why. It's strange, he said finally, leaning back on his hands. I never appreciated how much these moments shaped me. I thought they were small, unimportant, but now I see they were everything. I smiled, reaching over to lightly touch his arm. They mattered to me, too. Life moves quickly, but sometimes it's the little things that leave the deepest marks. He nodded, taking a deep breath. I want to be more present, he admitted. I want to remember what matters, and not let myself be buried under responsibilities I don't even understand. I told him that the garden was a perfect place for such reflection. Each plant, each seed, required patience, care, and attention. Life, too, could be tended in small, deliberate ways. We didn't need grand gestures to repair what had been strained between us, just consistent, small acts of connection. For the next hour, we moved through the garden together, planting, weeding, and arranging young shoots. Daniel's hands were steady, his expression calm, his laughter soft when a bee startled him or when a stray leaf landed on his shoulder. I realized then how much I had missed these ordinary moments, the gentle, unremarkable interactions that quietly build trust and intimacy. Eventually, we paused near the rose bushes. The blooms were soft and pale, catching the sunlight like fragile jewels. Daniel leaned against the stone bench and exhaled slowly. I feel lighter today, he said. Not fully healed, not fixed, but lighter. And that feels like enough for now. Yes, I said softly. It is enough. Healing isn't instantaneous. It's gradual, cumulative, like the growth of plants in a well-tended garden. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that made me think of the boy he used to be. I think I've forgotten how much I can enjoy just being here, just working and talking without worrying about what comes next. That's the beauty of it, I replied. Sometimes the best moments are the simplest ones. We continued our work, but now with a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. Daniel told me about some hobbies he had put aside, painting, reading novels, even taking walks with no particular destination. He seemed eager to reclaim the parts of himself that had been neglected for so long. I encouraged him, reminding him that joy and responsibility could coexist, and that tending to oneself was just as important as tending to others. As the afternoon sun began to tilt toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the garden, we paused again to admire our work. The rows of plants were neat, the flowers vibrant, the air filled with the subtle hum of life. Daniel leaned back, wiping his hands on his jeans, and looked around thoughtfully. I think I needed this more than I realized, he admitted. Not just the garden, but this connection. Talking without pressure, just being here with you. I reached out, brushing a leaf aside and letting my hand rest briefly on his shoulder. It's never too late to rebuild bonds, I said gently. Sometimes we just need the right space and the patience to let them grow. Daniel nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. I want to keep coming, he said. Not just today, but regularly. It helps me remember who I am and what matters. That would make me very happy, I replied, my voice soft but steady. The garden will always be here for you, just as I will be. We spent the remainder of the afternoon in quiet work, the rhythm of our shared effort bringing an unspoken sense of peace. As the sky shifted into deeper shades of gold and pink, we stood together near the gate, surveying the garden that now felt more alive than ever. Daniel paused, turning to me with a thoughtful smile. Thank you, he said simply, for this, for listening, for letting me find my way back. And in that moment, I realized that the garden had done more than nurture plants. It had nurtured healing, understanding, and the quiet rebuilding of trust. I knew that this was only the beginning, but the bond between us felt stronger, steady as the earth beneath our feet, alive with the promise of many more shared mornings to come. Days passed, and a quiet rhythm settled over our mornings in the garden. Daniel became a steady presence, arriving almost without fail, often carrying a coffee or a small tool he thought might be useful. At first, we worked silently, side by side, letting the routine of planting, watering, and pruning speak for itself. Yet in that silence, something profound was taking shape, a bridge rebuilt slowly, moment by moment, with trust and understanding as its foundation. One morning, the air was crisp, the soft light of early summer spilling over the rows of young plants. Daniel was crouched by the tomato beds, his hands gentle but purposeful. I joined him, and for a while we worked without speaking, letting the comforting rhythm guide us. Then he looked up, brushing sweat from his brow, and said, "I've been thinking a lot about what I want. Not what I should do, or what others expect of me, but what I actually want." I smiled, nodding. It's an important question, one that takes courage to answer honestly. He leaned back, eyes following the sunlight flickering through the leaves. I want to live more intentionally. I want to notice the small things, appreciate moments like this, and not let life pass me by while I chase something vague. That's the beauty of gardening, I said, and of life. Growth happens slowly, with care and attention. It's never perfect, but each step matters. Daniel paused, taking in the sight of the garden around us. "You know," he said softly, "I think this place reminds me of who I used to be. The boy who loved being curious, who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, who could find joy in small discoveries. I want to carry some of that back into my life now." Hearing him speak this way, I felt a swell of warmth. It had been years since I saw that spark in his eyes, the unguarded, curious energy of childhood that sometimes gets buried beneath adult responsibility. I reached over, letting my hand rest briefly on his shoulder. "You've never lost it, Daniel. It's been there all along. Sometimes we just need a space to remember it." The day unfolded gently, the sun climbing higher as we tended to the garden. Daniel spoke about dreams he had tucked away, hobbies and interests he'd set aside, and even little things he wanted to do differently in daily life. Painting, reading, walking without purpose. These were small, but they held the promise of joy, and he was beginning to reclaim them. I encouraged him, reminding him that responsibility and pleasure could coexist, and that caring for oneself was not selfish but necessary. By late afternoon, the garden looked vibrant, alive with colors and scents. Flowers swayed lightly in the breeze, vegetables grew in neat rows, and the soft hum of bees filled the spaces between our movements. Daniel leaned back against the stone bench, taking in the view, and for a long moment, we simply sat together, enjoying the peace we had cultivated. "I feel lighter," he said at last, "more present. Like I'm finally noticing what matters instead of rushing past it." "That's the beginning," I replied softly. "Being present is the first step toward living fully." He turned to me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I want to thank you for being patient, for listening, for giving me this space without judgment. I didn't realize how much I needed it until I came back." "You didn't need to realize it," I said. "Sometimes it's enough to just show up, to allow yourself to be here. The rest follows naturally." We spent the remainder of the afternoon in quiet conversation, sharing memories and reflections, and even laughter. The connection that had felt distant for so long was now palpable, alive in the way our hands moved together over the soil, in the shared smiles, in the gentle ease of companionable silence. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, warm shadows over the garden, Daniel stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. "I'd like to keep doing this," he said, "not just for a few mornings, but as part of my life. It grounds me, reminds me of what's important, and I think it's helping me grow in ways I didn't expect." "I'd like that too," I said. This garden will always be open to you, and I'll always be here. Life changes, seasons change, but some things, some bonds, remain constant if we nurture them. Daniel smiled, the kind of full, unguarded smile that warms the heart. I think I'm ready to nurture them now. We walked slowly to the gate together, side by side. The air was rich with the scent of flowers, the sun softening in the late afternoon, painting everything in gold and rose hues. He paused, glancing back at the garden, then at me. "Thank you," he said again, more sincerely than before, "for giving me this space, this chance to remember who I am and who I want to be." "You're welcome, Daniel," I said. "And thank you for trusting me, for being willing to show up." He turned and walked down the stone path, shoulders relaxed, a calmness in his step that hadn't been there for years. I lingered for a moment, taking in the garden, the rows of plants we had nurtured, the flowers swaying in the gentle breeze, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. It was more than a garden. It was a symbol of patience, care, and the quiet but profound ways we can heal and reconnect with the ones we love. Over the following weeks, our routine continued. We planted, pruned, laughed, shared memories, and discovered new joys together. Daniel began taking small steps to reclaim parts of his life that had been neglected, and I watched with quiet pride as he grew steadier, more present, and more himself with each passing day. The garden became a sanctuary for both of us, a reminder that growth, emotional, personal, relational, requires patience, attention, and love. One particularly warm morning, we sat on the stone bench after a long session of planting sunflowers and herbs. Daniel reached over and lightly squeezed my hand. "I feel like I've found my way back," he said softly. "Not just to the garden, but to myself. And I think to you, too." Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness, but of profound relief and joy. "And I've found you," I whispered. "Right here, right where you belong." In that moment, the garden seemed to glow brighter, as if acknowledging the healing that had taken root. It wasn't about grand gestures or sudden transformations. It was about showing up, listening, and letting the quiet magic of connection do its work. Seasons would change, challenges would come, but now we had a rhythm, a trust, and a bond that could weather anything. And as the sun finally dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with shades of amber and rose, I realized that the greatest discoveries in life are often the quietest. Shared mornings, simple acts of care, and the courage to open one's heart. The garden had taught us that growth comes in many forms, and the love that had quietly flourished between us would endure, steady and alive, for all the seasons yet to come.